On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 2015. We're going to be taking a look at Lady Gaga, and she's going to be performing a Sound of Music medley. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So this video was requested a few months ago now when I did a video on Julie Andrews, and this naturally just came up because of the fact that Julie does actually join Lady Gaga on stage after this performance. I'm just going to edit this bit into the video. Unfortunately, it got blocked on copyrights, so the link is going to be in the description below. You guys can click on that, watch the performance there, and then return here for the analysis, and I'll see you guys in the comments section. I'm just going to jump in here, and if you want to refer back to that earlier Julie Andrews video, you can do, to see an analysis of her singing a lot of the things that I mentioned in that video. I will bring up here as well, just as a focal point, because something that I talk about in that previous video is the way that Julie sang with such clear enunciation of the words, and this is something that Lady Gaga is putting into the performance. Bear in mind that she's American and she's just putting this English accent into the performance, making it so authentic. But the other thing that she's doing is applying the vowel modifications as closely as she can do to the same way that Julie did. When Julie used to do it, they were just so subtle you wouldn't notice them, and it would sound like she's singing every single word crystal clear. It is even more impressive when you consider the fact that Lady Gaga is singing through this English accent but still applying the vowel modifications faultlessly throughout the performance. And at 1 minute and 39 seconds, you can rewind the video to that point, the performance video, in order to hear the vowel modification of go, because it almost sounds like gore to start with, but then she just smoothly transitions into that go sound. And by the time you hear the word that she's singing, the vowel modification has already happened. That's how subtle it is. This is one of those compositions that vocally has got to be faultless the whole way through in order just to sing it half decently, because setting your sights at this kind of level is really shooting for the stars. And Lady Gaga does such a great job. And when Julie Andrews does come on at the end, she applauds and hugs Lady Gaga. So if you're getting an endorsement from Julie Andrews, it shows you how good it is. Having all of this ability in front of an audience without your instrument, and I'm talking about playing the piano here, because Lady Gaga has been a pianist all her life, has been playing since a very young age, I think around the age of 4. So I'm sure that when she started her career, she would have been playing to small crowds of people at bars and clubs, but she'd be behind that piano, which means that she's got that barrier between her and the crowd. And anybody that does play an instrument will be able to relate to this, where it's almost like a bit of a safety blanket between you and the audience. If you play the guitar, you've got the instrument there. It is something that you can rely on, and if you want to, you can ad-lib and fill in a bit of time with your guitar playing. Exactly the same with the piano. And Lady Gaga, from initially being behind that piano and performing to now performing at the Oscars just with a microphone and her vocal cords, it is such a dramatic change. It's also something that you might find when you listen to a pianist and they're singing behind the piano, it's all great, but then they might pick up the microphone and go to the front of the stage, and they can seem a little bit awkward because they really want to be back behind that piano, because that is where their comfort zone is, because they've mastered this instrument. Whereas when you play an instrument and then you start to sing as well, sometimes you feel like you don't really master your vocal cords to the point where you are as comfortable with just those as playing an instrument. I do want to talk about Lady Gaga as an artist and the way that she exploded onto this scene in 2008 with her debut album. I'll do that at the end of the video because it is an interesting case study of how the music industry was and how it is now and how unfortunately it might be in the future, but we'll get into that at the end of the video. I do want to cover a couple more things with relation to this performance, but also vocally, the way that when Lady Gaga is singing this, by the way, in exactly the same key as Julie Andrews did. And when we're talking about Julie Andrews, having her classical training, the background, Lillian Stiles Allen, the soprano who trained Julie Andrews, we're talking about just a standalone vocal that Julie had. Just taking on that performance full stop is such a tall order, like I said. But the great thing about the performance here is the way that she manages to control her voice to the point where she's releasing into her head voice and up into the top part of her range. Something that I want to throw in there as a reference point to range in this performance, the second note that we hear in this performance is a D5. And that's on the 10th fret if you've got your guitars out. And if you don't know what a D5 is, a C1 is the lowest C note you can get on a piano. So just imagine a piano, and on the left-hand side of that, if you count up 1 octave, you then get C2, 3 octaves is C3, 4 octaves is C4, and that's middle C, by the way. But we are into D5, so it means we've gone up to C5. We're a tone above that at D5. That's the highest note that Lady Gaga is singing here. And she sings it the second note into the performance. So talk about a tall order. Normally a singer builds up to the high note at the end of a performance, and that is the crescendo of the composition and the big finish. But here, the big finish is actually a tone below the D. So it means that it's a C5 that is the end of the composition, the crescendo of the whole piece, the whole performance. So that already could mess with your head if you're a vocalist who struggles to hit a particular high note, especially when you're talking about Julie Andrews and trying to hit the notes that she did. But just thinking about the high note is the second note that I'm singing straight away when I start the performance. So Lady Gaga just nails it because she's releasing her voice into her head voice and not leaning into her chest voice and taking that up too high. You might have heard mainstream pop singers who do sing in a lighter vocal cord coordination. So, for example, going into their head voice or just flipping over into a pure falsetto sound. But that kind of sound can't be applied to this kind of composition and vocal performance, because if Lady Gaga flipped over into falsetto here, you lose all of the resonance and all of the body of the sound. And this is why it's so difficult to sing, because most singers would be able to flip over into falsetto in order to hit the notes, but it's not doing that, which is the difficult thing. Actually getting that clean tone in head voice and keeping the resonance there. By the way that Lady Gaga performs, you can tell that a hell of a lot of work has gone into just this one performance, with the transitions that she goes through in her vocal registers and the enunciation. You can tell that she's got such an appreciation of the music fundamentally, and also such a respect for Julie Andrews. And Lady Gaga is one of those artists that has so many influences. Just naming a few of them, you've got Stevie Wonder in there, you've got Michael Jackson, you've got Whitney Houston, you've got Mariah Carey, you've got vocalists who were just standalone vocalists, but also vocalists who were top instrumentalists. And she's just rolled all of these influences into a ball and then channeled her own music through that. And that's why her music is so different and interesting when you really do dive into it. But with this performance, it's purely a vocal performance. So the amount of work that she has done to get it to this level must have been so extensive. And some people might not appreciate the hours and days and weeks and months that have gone into just this one performance. Let me also mention vibrato, because that is a make or break technique in this style of music. With other styles and genres, you can get away without having a strong vibrato, but with this, we have constant long held notes. So it means that those notes have got to be able to sing and sound nice. So the application of vibrato is a necessity, and it has got to be even. The frequency has got to be even, and it's got to cover a particular pitch so that it's not over the top, but it isn't understated either. It's just shooting that vibrato at exactly the right place, which is what Lady Gaga does here. Total control all the time. I've just cued the video to a point where we're going to have a listen to Lady Gaga's vibrato, and just to show you guys what I mean when I talk about frequency and being so even and consistent and having such control. And the word is just going to be lonely, and it is going to be slowed down, and then I'll demonstrate what I mean afterwards.
My heart is lonely.
So there, we've got lonely. It is a perfect frequency, and the timing is always hitting the to the point where it's like a metronome. It is so spot on. So it means that once that's sped up, obviously that's in slow motion. So if you're seeing the starting note as a straight line, when you apply that vibrato like we saw there, if we go in really slow motion, we're going it's taking that note down, and the further you go down, the more dramatic the vibrato is going to sound. And if you take the note up, it's going to have the same effect. If you go and you go up really high, you start to get the classical vibrato, because once that's sped up, you get and the higher you go, the more dramatic it's going to sound, in exactly the same way. The lower you go, the more dramatic it's going to sound. So taking those elements, it means that the vibrato is always coming down to exactly the same pitch before going back up to your starting pitch. And at the point that it touches its lowest pitch, that is being touched in time. So it's going like that. So it is the control of vibrato that Lady Gaga has that makes every single note sing, and it's not only just having control of it in a comfortable range, but releasing into her head voice and doing exactly the same thing. I'm starting to get the impression that this could be one of those videos that goes on for years, because when you start looking at these vocal techniques in detail, especially with a singer like Lady Gaga, there is so much to look at. The great thing about this performance, that last note, by the way, was the C5 that I mentioned earlier. She was all in with that last note, and the vibrato again, so even, so controlled, but also the way that at the end of the performance, you can see that when she gets a standing ovation, she is humbled by the response that she gets from the crowd. And here, of course, at the Oscars, there's plenty of very famous people in the audience. Even though she's very upfront in music videos, and especially when she first started in 2008, it's this front of being very provocative with the music videos. That's just something that artists pretty much have had to do for quite a long time now. In order to just get a little bit of time on TV, you've got to do a video that stands out and is risky and provocative in certain ways. But with this vocal performance, you can tell that there is a genuine musician underneath that is really hoping that people like her version of a Julie Andrews performance that is so up there that she's just hoping maybe to get a bit of applause. But she really does an amazing job. I'm sure that throughout her childhood, her parents must have watched The Sound of Music. It would have been ringing around in the house. Because she's a few years younger than I am, I certainly know that it was ringing around my house when I was younger, and you just knew Julie Andrews' voice. It was something that was so iconic but so recognizable for me as a child, and Lady Gaga certainly would have had that. I think that when she did first burst onto the scene, a lot of the older generation misunderstood her, because when you're watching the videos, it's been the same in the music industry for years, where in order to get the spotlight, you have to do something different. You have to stick out. And more often than not, it's by doing something that has a bit of a shock tactic to it. And even we're talking about in the late 60s, early 70s with Alice Cooper. having the shock rock approach that he took, it was giving yourself the limelight for then people to listen to your music. And that has continued from the 70s into the 80s, into the 90s. It just so happens that into the 2000s and now really into the 2010s and going into the 2020s, the shock factor has been taken over by the sex sells factor. The more skin you show, the more limelight you can have, and then you can maybe get people to listen to your music. But the catch-22 is people aren't listening to your music anymore. Unfortunately, artistically, that's where everything falls down, because the people who don't have as much talent are showing more of themselves in order to get more of the limelight. And that is the way that the music industry has gone, certainly in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years. This is another thing that I want to touch on. A lot of people, when they saw Lady Gaga for the first time, they didn't know her background. They didn't know that she's been playing the piano since the age of 4, that she's mastered an instrument, that she's a songwriter. She got signed as a songwriter previously before she even was an artist in her own right. She was writing for other people. She wrote for popular artists. I know that a lot of people, for some reason, will look down on the fact that the song was written for the Pussycat Dolls. She wrote for Britney Spears as well, New Kids on the Block, Fergie was in there. So she was writing songs for mainstream artists who were selling a lot of copies of her songs that she was writing. So you've got to take your hat off for her on that side of things, of being a songwriter as well as being an instrumentalist. And it's when she was laying down a vocal for a demo, or at least a reference for an Akon track, that she then got noticed by Akon. He heard her voice, and this is what happens with songs that are then put forward to artists. You put down a guide vocal on the song that has been written, so then the artist knows how the melody goes, and then the artist that is featured applies their vocal to the song. So Lady Gaga had her vocal on something that she had written, and Akon thought, well, that's good. Why isn't this person signed? So he convinced his record label to sign Lady Gaga, but also Akon signed her in a joint venture with the record label to his own record label. It is interesting when you just spend a little bit of time looking into the background, her rise to fame, and the way that she got where she is wasn't because she knew someone and then they helped her get signed and she wasn't very good, but they promoted her a lot. She was an instrumentalist and a singer, studied at music college, started up a band called SG Band, and she was actually noticed at the New Songwriters Showcase at the Songwriters Hall of Fame. And from this, she started writing electro-pop tracks and got signed to Def Jam Records. And it's interesting that Def Jam would re-sign her in the future, but this first time she got dropped after 3 months. She then got into neo-burlesque shows, and at this point she met someone called Lady Starlight, and she was someone that helped her to mold her onstage image. And it wasn't only her image that was being molded here, it was her whole onstage persona. She continued to write and became an apprentice songwriter at a publishing company called Famous Music. And through that, she struck a deal at Sony ATV as a songwriter. And that's where she was writing for the artists that I've already mentioned. So when she released her debut album, The Fame, in 2008, it was a monster hit all over the world. It pretty much got to #1 in every country. And Just Dance and Poker Face were singles from that album. And Poker Face sold 9.8 million copies just on its own. And it is interesting when you really dive into the sound that Lady Gaga had in that first album. Thinking about that first songwriting contract that she had, where she was writing electro pop, it pretty much is that, with lots of other influences thrown in, and it was such a unique sound. And you think that especially nowadays it is difficult to come up with a sound that is unique and standalone, but Lady Gaga managed that in 2008. Just go back to those tracks, dive into them and listen to them from the point of production and the amount that is in there. There is so much to just tweak your attention in all of her tracks. You cannot question the production on the songs, but also the melodic components and the quality of the songwriting. She just has that ability as a songwriter to put something melodic down that is so hooky. You will be singing it, even if you don't like it. And that is the point of having songs that are so catchy. When you know that she started off gigging and playing the small bars and clubs like every single musician has, when she then got onto the world stage and did a tour in the 2010 Monster Ball tour that she did, that was a record breaker. She grossed over $227 million on that tour. So that was the biggest debut tour ever, and she's just been setting records ever since. She's won 11 Grammys so far. She does so much charity work as well, and I think that the process that she went through in 2008 was such an important one to just announce herself on the scene. You have got to, unfortunately, jump through the hoops of the music industry, however the music industry is at the time that you want to break onto it. It's absolutely fine as well for people to listen to an artist and say, it's not my kind of music. That genre and the sound doesn't do anything for me personally. But that doesn't then take away all the ability of the person who's making that music. It just means that it isn't to a particular person's taste, which is absolutely fine because music is art. I do want to end on a final thought about the music industry that has been. I've looked at so many videos from as early as the 30s and the 40s, 50s, 60s, you name it, every single decade up until this year and last year. And for me, something that comes up in the comment section a lot is when people say about back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and they relate that to the modern day industry, and they say that there aren't artists around like there used to be. And for me personally, Lady Gaga is a throwback to the 60s and the 70s. These singer-songwriters who used to just play the bars and the clubs. They worked at it, they wrote their own songs, they performed their own songs, they worked at their instrument, and they worked at their voice as well, and had such a wide skill set. The top artists also then went into acting as well and had that ability. This is the thing that, on the whole, today's music industry doesn't really produce artists that have all of those skills that they used to have back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. But Lady Gaga, for me, if you accept the fact that she had to try and get the attention somehow from all the other artists who are just doing the same things, showing a lot of skin and might not necessarily be very talented, you have to try and do something to get the spotlight. But once you get that spotlight, you're hoping that people can look past that and understand that you've got to play the game in order to get people's attention. And then when you start to look at performances like this, you really do understand, when you look into her history as well, that she is a throwback. And for me, Lady Gaga is probably the closest you're going to get in the modern day industry. It is interesting when you just take a step back and look at all of the top musicians of all time. They all have the same things in common. They have honed their craft before they've become well known by playing in bars and clubs and any venue they can to get that experience, so that when they do break onto the scene, they are the finished article. They have also been playing an instrument from normally a young age, so that the instrument is subconscious. So they can now sing at the same time. And when they sing, they have got mastery of all of the techniques they need in order to make those notes sing with vibrato, the control of pitch, the breath control as well. Some people have been singing since a very young age as well. So it means that the instrumental ability is subconscious and the singing ability is subconscious. Then they write their own songs, they compose. They write with their experiences that they've been through personally throughout their lives. And it's something that when you just roll that all into one and pair it with hard work and not taking no for an answer, that is probably the biggest ingredient that is required to become successful, is hard work. And don't listen to anybody who tells you you can't do it, because there is always a story with every single top musician, and also just top successful individual in any realm, they have been told at some point that that wasn't the thing for them. They should pick something else to do. But they have had belief in themselves. If you start out just not being able to play an instrument or sing, if you worked at it every day for 4 hours for 6 to 10 years, I guarantee you that you would be better than somebody who is naturally talented but doesn't do any hard work. That's just the way it is in life, and it's just something you can take out of the leaf of the most successful people in the world, but also musicians who I'm talking about now. They have worked at it every single day and just not taking no for an answer. Imagine if Lady Gaga, when she got dropped from Def Jam Records after her first songwriting contract, then she wouldn't be where she is. If she just gave up and said, oh, well, they don't want me, I might as well give up and I'll just get a normal 9-to-5 job and that's it. It's not the way a successful person's brain works. Just don't take no for an answer. And I think that once you've got that passion and that drive, you will get there because you share the same things in common as those who have made it right to the top. Also, when talking about great singer-songwriters who do play an instrument, I want to throw in here that being able to write a song is having a great appreciation of melody as an entity and knowing what sounds good and what might sound good over a particular chord. And I think a lot of that is to do with learning an instrument and becoming well versed at playing an instrument, but also having a subconscious appreciation of melody due to that ability that you have learned from a young age. And also it's something that you can learn later on in your life. You start to really take in music and melody as a language in exactly the same way that you can learn to speak a whole different language when you're older. It doesn't matter. You can do that with music. Pick up an instrument, learn how to play it, and your brain will start to learn the language of music that this instrument is teaching you. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!